At 18, the council forced her to marry the dying Alpha King in order to save their pack. The wind whispered through the dark forests that surrounded the kingdom of Thaler, carrying secrets older than the mountains themselves. Among the ancient trees, shadows shifted like living things, and the moon cast pale light upon the twisted roots and silver streams. It was a world where loyalty, strength, and cunning shaped lives, where kings and queens ruled not just with law, but with power that could bend the very land. Lyra stood at the edge of her pack's council hall, her hands pressed together as if grounding herself against the storm of thoughts that raged inside. At 18, she had never imagined that her life would pivot on a single, terrible decree. She had trained herself in diplomacy, strategy, and the ways of the pack, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. The council elder, a tall woman with hair like frozen night, met Lyra's gaze. "Lyra," she said, voice as calm as still water yet carrying an edge sharp enough to cut, "the council has made its decision. Your duty begins tomorrow. You are to be married to King Malric of Thaler." Lyra's chest tightened. She had heard tales of Malric, the Alpha King who had ruled the pack with iron will for decades, now old and broken, yet still feared by many. Whispers spoke of curses that ran through his bloodline, of power so dark it could twist hearts, and of a life held together by strength and fear. I cannot," Lyra whispered, though her voice sounded small even to her own ears. "I have never." "You can," the elder interrupted. "You must. Our pack's survival depends on it. King Malric is dying. Without an heir, without the bond of a new mate, our people will fall into chaos. You have no choice." Lyra's knees shook. She had spent her life defending the pack, training to serve, to fight, to lead if necessary. But this was not training. This was a leap into shadows where no light promised safety. That night she barely slept. The council hall seemed far away now, replaced by visions of the castle that awaited her, the seat of power and fear, home to a king whose eyes were rumored to pierce through lies and truths alike. She wondered what awaited her in the stone corridors, under the cold gaze of guards and servants who had seen more than they should have. And most of all, she wondered what Malric would see in her. The next morning, Lyra rode through the forest, the trees towering like silent sentinels. The carriage she rode in creaked beneath her weight, but its interior was warm. Still, no comfort could reach her heart. Every step brought her closer to the castle, and the life she had never wanted but was forced to claim. When the carriage finally reached the gates, they were enormous, carved from blackened oak and steel, with runes etched into their surface that glowed faintly. Lyra felt a shiver that had nothing to do with cold. It was the weight of history, of power, and of lives built and lost beneath these very stones. Inside, the castle was quiet but not peaceful. Shadows clung to every corner, as though the walls themselves remembered centuries of kings and queens, betrayals and loyalties, victories and deaths. The servants avoided her eyes, and the guards saluted with faces carved from stone. The air was heavy, as if the past pressed down on the present, warning her to tread carefully. And then she met him. King Malric. He was not what she expected. Though old and frail in body, his presence was immense. His hair was silver, his posture straight, but it was his eyes that struck her most. They were dark, almost too black to be eyes, yet filled with a storm that churned beneath the surface. One glance from him, and Lyra felt as though he could see every thought, every secret, every fear she tried to hide. "Lyra," he said, voice low but resonant, like a melody that demanded attention, "the council speaks of duty, but they forget the cost." "Tell me, do you understand what you are asked to carry?" Lyra swallowed. "Yes, your majesty, I understand." "Do you?" His gaze softened for the briefest instant, and then the storm returned. "Do you understand that to marry me is not merely a union of hearts but a binding to shadows, to curses older than you can imagine?" She hesitated, unsure if words could carry the weight of what she felt. "I will try." Malric studied her, then nodded once. "Try." That is all any of us can do. The first days were filled with tension. Lyra was watched constantly by the king, by the servants, by the guards, and sometimes, she felt, by the very walls themselves. Every hallway seemed to hold a secret, every shadow a whisper. She learned quickly that in this castle, silence could speak louder than any words, and a wrong glance could change the course of the day. Malric, for his part, was unpredictable. Some moments he was distant, commanding, untouchable. Others he sought her counsel, asking questions not of duty, but of thought, of feeling, of memory. Lyra found herself drawn into the puzzle of him, understanding that behind the icy control was a mind brilliant and weary, a heart locked behind bars she could not yet see. One evening, as the castle lay in quiet darkness, Lyra wandered the corridors, unable to sleep. She came to a high balcony overlooking the forest, the moonlight spilling silver over her face, and there she heard him. Malric was not speaking to her, not yet. He was speaking to shadows. His words were low, almost a whisper, but they carried across the stone walls. "Soon," he said, voice trembling with unaccustomed emotion, "soon it will end. But if she falls, if she cannot, the pack will suffer as I have suffered, and my curse will continue." Lyra froze. She could not tell if she had been seen or not. The words chilled her, yet they stirred a fierce determination. She would not fail, not him, not the pack, not herself. Over the following days, they continued their dance of distance and closeness. Malric tested her, probing her knowledge of politics, of the forest, of the pack. Lyra, in turn, studied him, seeking the threads of humanity beneath the king's storm. Sometimes she caught glimpses, a flash of humor, a soft sigh, a momentary glance that lingered longer than propriety allowed. Yet the weight of duty never left them. Every smile was tempered with the knowledge of the curse that shadowed them. Every conversation held an unspoken question. Could they survive this, together or apart? One night during a banquet lit with candles that flickered like stars caught in jars, Malric's health failed him. His hand shook as he lifted a cup of wine, and his face paled. Lyra moved to his side, offering support, and for the first time he allowed himself to lean on her. Not as a king to a subject, not as a master to a servant, but as a man reaching for something he had long denied himself. "You are stronger than I thought," he said quietly. "Stronger than anyone could ask for, stronger than I deserve." Lyra's heart thumped in her chest. She wanted to reply, to offer words that could anchor him, that could soothe the fear she felt reflected in his eyes. But the words stuck, heavy and meaningless against the tide of history and expectation. Instead, she simply nodded, pressing a hand to his arm, feeling the heat of life that remained, the fragility that threatened to vanish. As the night drew to a close, she left the banquet hall and walked through the quiet halls, listening to the echoes of her own thoughts. The castle had grown even darker in her absence. The wind whispered again, through cracks in the stone, around corners where shadows lingered. And Lyra realized, with a chill she could not shake, that this was only the beginning. The beginning of a life she had not chosen, in a place where every step could be perilous, where every smile could hide betrayal, and where love, if it came, would be tested by curses, power, and the weight of duty. Yet despite the fear, despite the shadows, a flicker of something unexpected stirred within her heart, something that whispered of possibility, of strength, of survival, and perhaps in time of connection. The night deepened. The moon cast silver paths across the castle grounds, and somewhere within the vast corridors, King Malric whispered again to shadows that understood more than they should. "If she cannot save me, if she cannot save us, then all is lost." Lyra shivered. She did not yet know what it meant to save a king or herself, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she would not run. She would face the shadows, the curse, the king, and whatever trials awaited her. Because some things were worth more than fear, worth more than comfort, worth more than life as she had known it. And in the deepest shadows of the castle, the night waited, patient, watching, whispering promises of trials yet to come. The castle of Thaler woke slowly beneath a gray, mist-laden sky. The wind carried the scent of wet stone and distant forests, curling through open windows and into the halls. Lyra walked along the corridors, her steps echoing softly. She had begun to feel the weight of the castle, the kind that pressed not only on her shoulders but on her heart. Every door she passed whispered of stories long past, of kings and queens who had ruled with power and fear, and of secrets that had never been spoken aloud. Since her arrival, life in the castle had become a delicate balance. She was the king's mate by decree, yet she remained an outsider in the eyes of many. The servants whispered behind her back, some with curiosity, some with suspicion. The councilmen watched her closely, as though she were a delicate bird who might either soar or break under the weight of expectation. And then there was Malric. The king had grown stronger in his presence, or perhaps it was simply that Lyra had begun to see the truth hidden beneath the legends. He was old and fragile, yes, but his mind was sharp and careful. He noticed everything, her hesitation, her courage, the way her eyes followed patterns she barely understood herself. And in fleeting moments, when the castle seemed to fall silent around them, he showed a softness that few had ever seen. Lyra was learning the subtle art of patience in this strange court. She observed the way Malric interacted with the guards, how he measured every word before speaking, how the shadows seemed to cling to him as though protective and dangerous at once. She wanted to reach him, to touch the soul behind the crown, yet fear often restrained her. Not fear of him alone, but fear of what she might discover in herself. The first days of her stay were quiet, but the castle was never truly silent. At night, the wind carried whispers, and the torches along the walls cast shadows that danced like living things. Lyra found herself drawn to these hallways, wandering them as though the castle itself were trying to speak. One evening, unable to sleep, she found herself standing outside Malric's chamber. The heavy doors loomed before her, carved with symbols of power and protection. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the brass handle, when a voice called her name from inside. Lyra. It was soft, cautious, but unmistakably him. She pushed the door open just enough to see him seated by the fire, the flickering flames reflecting in his dark eyes. His hand rested on an ancient tome, but his gaze was not on the pages, it was on her. "You are restless," he said. His voice carried no accusation, only observation. I cannot sleep," she admitted. "The castle, it is too quiet or perhaps too loud. I hear things I cannot understand." He smiled faintly, a curve of lips that carried a hint of melancholy. "The castle remembers," he said. "It remembers those who walked these halls before us. Their victories, their failures, their love, their fear. The shadows do not speak to everyone, but they listen to those who are willing to see." Lyra stepped closer, drawn by the warmth of the fire and the rare softness in his tone. "And what do they say to you?" she asked, curiosity rising despite the tension in her chest. "They remind me that time is not always kind, that even kings are bound by threads they cannot see," he said, "and they warn me of what is to come." Lyra's heart skipped. She had heard the legends of Malric's curse, of the darkness that had followed his bloodline for generations. Yet to hear him speak so openly of it, without fear or dramatics, made the stories feel real in a way that chilled her. "Do you think the curse will claim you?" she asked softly, almost afraid of the answer. He looked into the fire, his expression unreadable. "I do not know, but I know this: if it does, it will not spare those I care for. That is why you must be strong. For yourself, for the pack, and for me." The words hung between them, unspoken emotions twisting in the silence. Lyra wanted to say something, to reassure him, to offer herself as more than a duty-bound mate, but the right words seemed too heavy to speak. Instead, she nodded, feeling the fragile thread that connected them tighten just slightly. Over the next days, the castle began to reveal more of itself, and of Malric. Lyra learned the rhythm of the halls, the secret stairways, and the hidden gardens where he sometimes walked alone, speaking to shadows as if they were companions. She followed at a distance, careful not to intrude, and began to understand that the king's isolation was not just from age or fear, it was choice. The curse had shaped him, but he had allowed it to shape the world around him as well. The first encounter with true danger came unexpectedly. A rider from a neighboring territory arrived at the gates, bearing news of rebellion. Some of Malric's old allies had begun to question his strength, sensing weakness in the failing health of the king. The council had urged him to ignore the message, but Malric chose to act. Lyra watched him in the council hall as he listened to the rider. Every gesture was measured, every word deliberate. The king's presence commanded respect, but not through fear alone. There was something in the way he acknowledged each person, weighing their worth and their loyalty, that made the castle itself seem to hold its breath. "You must understand," Malric said, his voice carrying across the room, "that even in weakness we cannot falter. The pack relies on strength, yes, but also on judgment. Our enemies may see my body as frail, but they will not see my mind falter." Lyra felt a stir of admiration. She had expected a ruler broken by time and curse, but here was a man whose spirit refused to bow. And yet she also saw the toll it took on him. The sharp line of tension around his eyes, the way his hands shook slightly when he thought no one was watching. That night she found herself in the garden, the moonlight casting silver over the blooms. Malric emerged from the shadows, silent as a shadow himself, and stopped beside her. "You should not wander alone," he said. "The night is not always safe." "I know," she replied, "but the night is honest. It does not hide behind masks." He regarded her for a long moment, the fire of thought in his eyes meeting her own. "And yet, even in honesty, there are things we cannot see, cannot understand, cannot escape. You will learn this soon enough." Lyra shivered, not from cold but from the weight of his words. There was a truth in them that she could not yet fully grasp, a warning, yes, but also a promise. Days turned into weeks. The council's whispers grew more insistent, the rumors of rebellion more pressing, and the castle walls seemed to tighten around her. Yet in the midst of politics and whispers, she found herself drawn to Malric not only by duty, but by fascination. He was a puzzle she could not yet solve, a storm she could not yet weather, and a story she longed to read. One evening she found him in the library, surrounded by ancient tomes, the air heavy with the scent of old parchment. He looked up, and for a moment the weight of the king lifted, revealing a man who simply wanted to understand, to learn, to survive. "Lyra," he said, "you have a mind sharper than I anticipated. You see patterns, connections, truths that others overlook. Do not let the castle dull your senses." "I will not," she replied. "I will do what is necessary, for the pack, for you, for myself." He studied her as if weighing the honesty of her words against the weight of her spirit. "Good," he said finally. "You will need that strength. The curse does not rest, and neither do those who would see the pack fail. Trust me, there are forces beyond the walls, beyond our understanding, that seek to test us both." The words lingered like smoke. Lyra understood that their challenges were only beginning, that each day would bring trials of loyalty, courage, and heart. Yet despite fear, despite uncertainty, she felt a quiet determination growing. She would not falter. She could not falter. Then, on a night when the moon was hidden behind thick clouds, the castle was rocked by a scream. Lyra ran through the halls, heart pounding, and found Malric collapsed in the great hall, clutching his chest, pale and trembling. "Lyra," he whispered, eyes wide with something she could not name. "The curse, it is stronger tonight." She knelt beside him, hands trembling yet firm. "You are not alone," she said. "I am here. We will face this together." His hand found hers, and for a fleeting moment the king's stormy presence softened into something fragile, something human. "If I do not survive," he began, then stopped, unable to finish. "You will survive," she said firmly, her voice steadier than she felt. We will find a way. But deep within the shadows, Lyra sensed that the trials were only beginning. The curse was not merely a shadow over Malric. It was a storm gathering, one that would test their trust, their hearts, and the bond they had only begun to form. And as the wind howled through the castle walls, Lyra realized that she would need more than courage. She would need strength, wisdom, and the kind of love that could defy curses older than the mountains themselves. For in Thaler, the shadows never forgot, and they had begun to watch her closely. The castle of Thaler had grown colder in the days following Malric's collapse. The great halls that once echoed with authority now carried whispers of unease. Courtiers moved like shadows, careful not to draw attention, yet their eyes always lingered on the king and his mate. Lyra felt the weight of their scrutiny pressing down on her, yet it was nothing compared to the burden she carried herself. The knowledge that the curse was stronger now, that every day with Malric was a gift borrowed from fate itself. She moved through the halls with a purpose, balancing duty with a growing need to understand the man behind the crown. Malric's health was fragile, but his mind remained sharp, a double-edged weapon that kept allies loyal and enemies at bay. Yet she saw the cracks, the trembling of his hands when no one watched, the distant stare that seemed to search for something lost long ago. One morning, as the sun barely pierced the mist over the castle walls, Malric summoned her to the council chamber. The air was thick with tension. Advisors shuffled papers and whispered under their breath. The rebellion at the borders was growing bolder, sensing weakness in the king's condition. "Lyra," Malric began, his voice steady but carrying a weight of fatigue, "you have learned much in these weeks. You see beyond appearances, beyond fear. I need your counsel now more than ever." Lyra nodded, her heart tight with worry. She had spent sleepless nights studying maps, reviewing intelligence reports, and considering alliances. "The northern territories are vulnerable," she said. "If we strengthen the defenses there, we can prevent an attack long enough to negotiate peace." Malric's eyes darkened with thought. "And the eastern forests, the whispers speak of strange shadows moving there. Not men, not beasts, but something else, something old." Lyra's pulse quickened. The supernatural presence in Thaler had always been whispered about, but now it seemed to move closer to them, growing bolder. "I can investigate," she said. "If it is a threat, I will find it before it reaches the castle." Malric nodded slowly. "Good, trust your instincts. They will not fail you." It was during this investigation that Lyra first sensed the true reach of the curse. In the heart of the northern forest, the trees seemed alive, whispering in voices she could almost understand. Shadows twisted between trunks, moving as if they had purpose. She felt a tug in her chest, a cold pull that tried to shake her confidence. But she stood firm, remembering Malric's words, "Trust your instincts." Hours passed. The forest seemed endless, yet she pressed on, uncovering signs of dark magic, remnants of a curse older than the castle itself. Each discovery made her pulse quicken, not from fear alone, but from the realization that their struggle was greater than she had imagined. Returning to the castle, she found Malric waiting for her in the garden, the pale light of dusk wrapping the stone pathways in a quiet glow. His eyes softened when he saw her, and for a moment the world beyond the walls seemed to disappear. "You returned safely," he said. "I feared the forest might take you." "I am stronger than I look," Lyra replied with a faint smile, "and I have to be for you, for the pack." Malric regarded her for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. "I did not think anyone could face the darkness and return with light," he said softly. The words sent a shiver through her. She realized that Malric, for all his power, had never expected to find someone who could stand beside him. Not a soldier, not an advisor, not a council's pawn, but a partner, someone who could challenge the storm within him without fear. The days that followed were a delicate dance between duty and growing connection. Malric shared fragments of his past, tales of battles fought, mistakes made, and a loneliness that had haunted him for decades. Lyra listened, offering comfort where she could, her own heart opening despite the weight of expectation. Yet the curse lingered, always at the edges of their lives. Malric's health continued to waver, and strange events unfolded within the castle. Shadows seemed to move of their own accord, torches flickered when no wind blew, and whispers echoed through the halls at night. The court grew uneasy, and Lyra understood that fear was not born of imagination alone. One evening, as storm clouds gathered over Thaler, Malric called Lyra to the highest tower. The wind howled through open windows, tugging at their cloaks, carrying with it the scent of rain and the forest beyond. "Lyra," he said, voice low against the roar of the storm, "the curse, it is growing. I can feel it not just in my body but in the land, in the pack, in the very stones of this castle. If it continues, it will consume everything we hold dear." Lyra placed her hand over his, the warmth of her touch grounding him. "Then we fight it," she said firmly. "Together. We will find a way." Malric's eyes met hers, dark and stormy, yet softened by something fragile and human. "I have spent decades believing that I must bear this burden alone," he admitted. "But now I see that perhaps I was wrong." For the first time, Lyra felt the distance between them shrink, replaced by a connection that neither duty nor fear could sever. She realized that the king, so long a figure of legend and terror, was capable of trust, capable of hope, capable of change. But hope was fragile in Thaler. The next day brought a threat they could not ignore. A messenger arrived from the northern forests, pale and trembling. Villagers had vanished, and strange marks were left where they had stood. Shadows had been seen moving in impossible shapes, and the air itself carried a chill that froze both body and spirit. Malric gathered the council, his voice steady but urgent. "This is no longer a distant threat," he said. "It touches our people, our land, our pack. Lyra will accompany me. We must face it together." Lyra felt a surge of fear and determination. This was beyond any test she had imagined, yet she also felt a thrill of purpose. Together they would face the unknown, not as king and subject, but as allies, as partners, as something more. They rode through the northern forests as night fell, the wind whipping around them, rain beginning to fall in sharp, cold sheets. The trees seemed to close in, their twisted branches like fingers reaching for the riders. Yet Malric and Lyra pressed forward, guided by courage, instinct, and a growing bond neither could deny. Hours passed before they reached the heart of the forest, where the darkness was thickest, almost alive. Shadows moved in impossible shapes, and a low hum filled the air, vibrating through the ground, through the stone of the castle, through their very bones. Malric dismounted, drawing a ceremonial dagger of silver and etched runes. "This is the work of the curse," he said, voice steady despite the trembling of his hands. "We must confront it together." Lyra stepped beside him, placing her hand on his arm. "I am with you," she said. "Whatever it takes." The shadows shifted, coalescing into forms that seemed human yet unreal, as if the forest itself had taken life to test them. Lyra felt the pull of the curse, a cold, invisible weight pressing on her chest, trying to shake her courage. Yet she held firm, drawing strength from Malric's presence and the knowledge that they faced this not as solitary beings, but as one. For hours they battled the shadows, their minds and hearts intertwined in ways that neither fully understood. The storm above mirrored the storm within, lightning striking the trees, thunder rolling across the forest like drums of fate. And as dawn approached, the shadows began to waver, retreating under the force of their determination and unity. Malric, exhausted but alive, turned to Lyra, his eyes dark and stormy yet softened by relief and admiration. "You are stronger than I imagined," he said quietly. "Not just in body but in spirit. You have faced the curse and stood unwavering." Lyra smiled faintly, her own exhaustion heavy but tempered by triumph. "We faced it together," she said, "and we will continue to face whatever comes." As they began the ride back to the castle, the first rays of sunlight broke through the storm clouds, painting the forest in gold and silver. Lyra felt hope stir within her, fragile but real. She knew challenges would come again, curses were patient, shadows were persistent, but for now they had survived, together. And yet deep in the forest where the shadows lingered still, something moved. Something older, darker, and aware of the bond they had formed. The curse had been challenged, but it was not defeated. Its eyes watched them, waiting, patient, and the forest whispered promises of trials yet to come. Lyra did not see it, but she felt it in her heart, a sense that their journey was far from over, that the fires of redemption had only begun to burn. And when they returned to the castle, the echoes of the forest's warning followed them, a quiet reminder that courage alone might not be enough to save them. For in Thaler, the darkness was never gone. It waited, it watched, and it would test them again. The dawn broke slowly over Thaler, painting the castle walls in soft shades of gold and crimson. After the storm of the previous night, the air smelled of wet earth and the distant forests. Lyra stood on the highest balcony, looking out over the lands that she had come to care for deeply, her heart heavy with thought and yet lightened by purpose. She could feel Malric's presence behind her, steady and strong, though she knew he was still vulnerable, the curse lingering like a shadow just beyond reach. "Do you see it?" he asked softly, stepping beside her. His hand brushed hers, a small gesture of intimacy in a world where caution was constant. Lyra glanced at him, meeting the storm-dark eyes softened by exhaustion and quiet determination. "I see the sunrise," she replied, "and I see hope." Malric smiled faintly, though a shadow lingered across his features. "Hope," he said, "is a dangerous thing for those who are cursed. It promises more than it can always deliver, and yet without it there is only despair." Lyra's fingers found his, holding on as if to anchor him and herself. "Then we hold it together," she said, "and we face whatever comes side by side." The castle had become a place of preparation, not just for the pack, but for the final confrontation with the curse that haunted Malric's bloodline. Ancient texts, forbidden knowledge, and whispers from the forest spoke of a test that would require more than courage. It would demand trust, sacrifice, and the deepest bond of heart and spirit. The day passed with a sense of urgency. Malric moved through the castle with a determined pace, his advisors close behind, yet it was Lyra who observed the smallest signs, the tension in his hands, the pale color of his skin, the way he sometimes paused to catch a breath that did not come easily. She could see the toll the curse had taken, not just on his body but on his spirit. When night fell, they prepared for the journey into the forest, where the curse's origin awaited. The storm from the previous day had left the woods restless, shadows twisting between the trees as if alive. Lyra felt the pull immediately, a cold pressure on her chest that grew stronger with each step closer to the forest's heart. Malric placed his hand on her shoulder. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "remember that you are not alone. The bond we share is more than words, more than duty. It is the strength that will see us through." Lyra nodded, taking comfort in the rare softness he offered. Together they entered the forest, the darkness pressing close, the trees bending with an almost sentient awareness. Shadows flickered at the edges of their vision, and whispers curled around them like smoke. The curse was waiting, patient and knowing, aware that they were coming. Hours passed in tense silence. Each step seemed heavier than the last, each sound sharper, each shadow darker. Then in a clearing at the heart of the forest they found it, a figure cloaked in mist, eyes glowing faintly, radiating a power that was both ancient and terrifying. "I have waited," the figure said, voice echoing like wind through stone. "Many have tried and failed. Only one bond, pure and unbroken, can challenge the curse. You, Lyra, and you, Malric, are that hope. But do you understand what it will demand?" Lyra's grip on Malric's hand tightened. "We will face it," she said firmly. "Whatever it takes." Malric stepped forward, drawing the ceremonial dagger inscribed with runes that glowed faintly in the moonlight. "We are ready," he said. "Together." The figure raised a hand, and the shadows surged forward, testing them with visions of their deepest fears. Lyra saw Malric fall, alone and powerless, the weight of centuries pressing him into the earth. Malric saw Lyra captured by forces he could not fight, her spirit bound and broken. Each vision struck at their hearts, demanding surrender, feeding on doubt. But together they stood, voices and hands joined, hearts aligned. "We are not alone," Lyra said, her voice ringing clear through the forest. "We face this together." The shadows recoiled, the visions fading, but the figure remained, testing one final time. "Love alone is not enough," it said. "You must show trust, courage, and willingness to sacrifice." Malric looked at Lyra, the storm in his eyes mingling with vulnerability. "If I fall," he whispered, "I trust you to carry us both. You are my strength." Lyra's heart ached with the weight of his words. "And if I falter, you will carry me," she replied. "We are equals always, in strength and in heart." The figure studied them, and then the air shifted. The shadows withdrew, the forest seemed to breathe, and the tension lifted as if the very curse had been tested and found lacking. A faint light spread through the clearing, warm and golden, as though the sun itself recognized the bond they had forged. Malric sank to his knees, exhaustion visible in every movement. Lyra knelt beside him, holding his hand, offering strength as he drew deep, steadying breaths. "You have done it," she said softly. "You have survived. We have survived." The figure smiled faintly, then dissolved into mist, leaving only the sound of the forest breathing and the distant call of birds greeting the new day. The curse, though ancient and persistent, had been broken, not by strength alone, but by trust, love, and unity. They returned to the castle as the first rays of dawn spread over Thaler, painting the stones with warmth and light. Courtiers and servants watched in awe, not just at their survival, but at the transformation that seemed to radiate from them. Malric, once a figure of distant authority, now moved with a quieter strength, tempered by humility and gratitude. Lyra, once an outsider, now walked among them with confidence, recognized not just as the king's mate, but as a force of courage and wisdom. In the following days, the castle began to heal. Rebellions at the borders were quelled with diplomacy and strategic strength. The forests, once restless with the echoes of the curse, returned to calm, the shadows retreating. Lyra and Malric worked side by side, guiding the pack not just with power, but with compassion, understanding, and shared vision. One evening, standing atop the castle walls as the sun dipped into the horizon, Malric took Lyra's hand. "We have faced the shadows," he said, "and we have endured, but the true strength of a kingdom is not in walls or weapons, it is in the hearts of those who lead it." Lyra smiled, leaning into him. "And we lead together," she said, "always together." For the first time, the castle felt like home, not a place of fear and shadows, but a place of light, hope, and the bond of hearts united in trust and love. They had been tested and they had passed, not because they were alone, not because they were invincible, but because they had faced the darkness together, hand in hand. Yet even as peace settled over Thaler, a whisper of caution lingered. The forest beyond the walls carried secrets still, and the lessons of the curse remained a quiet memory, reminding them that vigilance and courage must always walk alongside love. Lyra knew that their journey was far from over. Challenges would come, storms would rise, and shadows would attempt to return. But she also knew that no curse, no darkness, no trial could break the bond they had forged. Together they were stronger than any legend, any fear, any shadow. And so, as the sun rose higher, casting warmth over the lands, Lyra and Malric stood together, not as king and subject, not as ruler and duty-bound mate, but as partners, equals, and kindred spirits. The curse had been broken, the pact secured, and a new dawn had come, not just for the kingdom but for their hearts. The forest whispered still, but its voice was no longer one of fear. It spoke now of renewal, of hope, and of the enduring strength that comes when hearts face the darkness and emerge unbroken. Lyra closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the crisp morning air. She had come to Thaler as a girl bound by duty, but she remained as a woman tempered by trials, strengthened by courage, and guided by love. Malric's hand rested over hers, steady and warm, a reminder that no shadow could touch them when they walked side by side. The kingdom would remember this day, though perhaps not the details of their struggle. It would remember the light that had returned to Thaler, the courage of a girl forced into a king's shadow, and the bond that transformed both curse and king alike. And somewhere deep in the forest, the shadows lingered, not as a threat, but as witnesses to a love and strength that even time and magic could not undo. Lyra opened her eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face and the steady heartbeat of the king beside her. "Together," she whispered. "Always," Malric replied. And with that the dawn of Thaler rose, not merely as the breaking of day, but as the renewal of hearts, courage, and a love that no shadow could ever touch.